Hello, friends. If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments.
Ward census. Every psychiatric unit runs on numbers. Beds occupied, medications dispensed, incidents logged. The head count is sacred, proof that we haven't lost anyone. That order still holds. But what happens when the math stops adding up? What do you do when the records insist you've been here longer than you remember? The morning census showed 23 patients. I counted 24 bodies. Then I saw my own employee ID on the admission list. I became charge nurse on the acute psychiatric unit at Harlow State Hospital in September, after the previous charge transferred out under circumstances no one would discuss. The job was administrative tedium punctuated by crisis, exactly what I'd trained for. Every morning at 0600 before the day shift arrived, I printed the ward census. A single-page report listing every patient assigned to our 30-bed unit, their room numbers, their attending physicians, their legal status. It was the first task of my routine, the foundation of everything else. You can't run a psychiatric unit if you don't know who's supposed to be there. The discrepancy started small. On my third week, I printed the census and counted 23 names. I walked the unit, checking each room with my master key, confirming faces against photos in the charts. When I finished, I'd counted 24 patients. I recounted, still 24. I checked the census again, 23 names. I assumed I'd miscounted and moved on. Memory under fatigue is unreliable. I'd learned that during my residency. I made a note to recount during afternoon rounds and got on with the medication pass. But that afternoon, the count matched. 23 patients, 23 rooms occupied. I convinced myself I'd been wrong that morning. The next week, it happened again. Census, 23. Physical count, 24. This time, I went room by room with the printed list, checking names and faces. Every patient on the census was accounted for. But in room 12, I found a young woman sitting on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. She wasn't on the list. I pulled her chart from the rack outside the door. The name tab was blank. "Hi there," I said gently, stepping inside. "I'm Helen, the charge nurse. What's your name?" She didn't respond, didn't look at me. Her hospital gown was standard issue, her wristband properly affixed. But when I leaned closer to read it, the text was smudged, illegible. "Can you tell me who admitted you?" "Nothing." I radioed security. "Did we have a late admission last night? Anyone brought in after the midnight count?" "Negative," came the reply. "Last intake was 1800 yesterday. Unit's been locked down since." I looked back at the woman. She hadn't moved. I checked the door log, the electronic record of every badge swipe in and out of the unit. No entries after 1900 except staff rotations. The unit had been sealed. I reported the discrepancy to the psychiatric director, Dr. Wynn. He reviewed the census himself, walked the unit with me, and confirmed 23 patients. When we reached room 12, the bed was empty. The chart rack was empty. "You're working too many doubles, Helen," he said, not unkindly. "Take tomorrow off." I didn't argue, but the next morning, even after a full night's sleep, the count was wrong again. This time, I printed the census and immediately noticed something new. At the bottom of the page, beneath the 23 patient names, there was a partial line, cut off mid-print as if the printer had run out of paper. But the tray was full. I reprinted. The same truncated line appeared. I leaned closer. The fragment of text was blurry. but I could make out part of an ID number, H6291. My employee ID is H6291. I checked the master database on the admin terminal. I searched for my ID number in the patient records archive. No results. I searched again, expanding the date range. Still nothing. Then I printed a fresh census from the main server, bypassing the nurse's station printer entirely. This time, the page printed fully. 24 names. At the bottom of the list, under room 30, a storage room we'd converted to office space years ago, was my name. Helen Grace on H6291, admitted. Current date. Status. Observation. I walked to room 30. The door was locked. I unlocked it. Inside was a hospital bed. The sheets were turned down. A patient gown was folded on the pillow. A chart hung on the wall. I opened it. The intake form was filled out in handwriting I recognized as my own. Chief complaint. Patient believes she is employed at this facility. Insists on performing nursing duties, requests to go home but cannot provide a valid address. Diagnosis: delusional disorder, occupational type. Plan: maintain therapeutic environment, encourage role play as coping mechanism. My hands were shaking. I backed out of the room and locked it again. I went to Dr. Wynn's office. I told him everything, calmly, procedurally, exactly how I'd been trained to report anomalies. He listened. He nodded. Then he stood and walked to his filing cabinet. He pulled out a folder with my name on it. "Helen," he said, "you've been a patient here for 6 months. That's not true. You were admitted after a breakdown at your previous job. You'd been working triple shifts, falsifying records, insisting you were the only one who could keep the unit running. You collapsed during a code. When they brought you here, you refused to believe you weren't staff. No. I have keys, I have a badge, I do the census every morning. We let you," he said. "It's part of your therapy. We print a fake census, you count the patients, it gives you structure." I looked down at the badge clipped to my scrubs, my photo, my name, my ID number, H6291. "You're doing well, Helen, but you need to stop trying to leave the unit." I ran. I don't remember the route I took, but I ended up back at the nurse's station. The monitor was on. The census was still on the screen. I watched as a new line populated at the bottom of the document, letter by letter, as if being typed in real time. Patient H6291. Observation continues. Compliance improving. Release contraindicated. I grabbed the keyboard and tried to delete it. The line reappeared. I shut down the terminal. When it rebooted, the census auto-loaded. 24 names, mine at the bottom. I pulled the power cord from the wall. The screen stayed on. The document kept updating. New lines appeared. Patient refuses medication. Patient exhibits paranoia. Employment status. Patient attempting to sabotage monitoring equipment. I looked up. The security camera in the corner of the station was aimed directly at me. The red light was on. I don't know how long I've been here. The days blend together. They still let me print the census every morning. They still let me walk the unit, checking rooms, counting faces, but now, when I count, I always come up one short. The records never lie. They simply know us better than we know ourselves. Four seclusion rooms exist for safety, a space to contain the uncontrollable until the crisis passes. We call them quiet rooms, but they're never truly silent. The walls remember every scream, every impact, every moment of surrender. And sometimes they remember things that haven't happened yet. The knocking came from inside the locked seclusion room. The restraints were swinging. The logbook said the room had been empty for 3 days. I worked the overnight shift at Maplewood Behavioral Health for 2 years before I heard the knocking. My job was simple. Walk the units every 30 minutes, check the seclusion rooms, document everything. The building was old, a former tuberculosis sanatorium converted into a psychiatric facility in the 60s, and it had the kind of architecture that felt heavy. Long hallways, high ceilings, doors that closed with the weight of finality. Quiet Room 4 was at the end of B Wing, past the patient dormitories in a section of the building we rarely used. It was structurally sound but outdated. No camera, no intercom, just a reinforced door with a small observation slot and a logbook mounted on the wall outside. We only used it when the newer seclusion rooms were occupied, maybe once a month. On the night it started, Room 4 had been empty for 72 hours. I knew because I'd checked the log during my rounds. The last entry was from Thursday, patient transferred to medical unit. Room cleared and sanitized. It was Sunday now, 0200, and I was walking B-Wing with my flashlight when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, rhythmic, coming from the direction of Room 4. I stopped walking. The hallway was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Then again, 3 soft knocks, evenly spaced. I approached the door. The observation slot was closed. I slid it open and shined my light inside. The room was empty, bare mattress on the floor, padded walls, nothing else. The restraints, leather cuffs attached to anchor points in the floor, were swinging slightly as if someone had just been released from them, but there was no one inside. I checked the logbook. No new entries. The door was locked from the outside. My master key was the only way in. I radioed Craig, the other overnight tech. "You been down to B-Wing tonight?" "Negative, why?" "Thought I heard something near Room 4. "That room's empty." "I know." I locked the observation slot and moved on. At 0400 during my next round, I heard it again. This time the knocking was louder, insistent. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I opened the slot. The restraints were swinging harder now, as if someone had just pulled against them with force. The mattress had moved. It was no longer centered on the floor. It had been dragged toward the door. I unlocked the room and stepped inside, flashlight raised. "Hello?" No response. The air was cold, colder than the hallway. I could see my breath. I walked to the restraints and touched one of the cuffs. It was warm. I spun around, half expecting someone to be standing behind me, but the room was empty. I checked the corners, the ceiling, the ventilation grate. Nothing. I left and locked the door. I checked the logbook again. There was a new entry. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it was neat. Procedural. 0347. Room occupied. Restraints applied. Patient calm. I looked at my watch. It was 0402. The entry was dated 15 minutes ago while I'd been on the other side of the building. I flipped back through the pages. Every entry for Room 4 over the past 6 months ended the same way. Patient calm. Even the violent ones, even the entries marked Code Gray or Patient Combative. Every single log ended with those 2 words. I radioed Craig again. "Did you write in the Room 4 log tonight?" "No, why would I? It's empty." "Someone wrote in it." Silence on the other end. Then, "I'm coming down." We stood outside Room 4 together, staring at the logbook. Craig read the entry, checked the time, and looked at me. "This your handwriting?" "No." "Then who—" The knocking started again. Louder this time. Frantic. Not 3 measured knocks, dozens, overlapping like fists pounding on the inside of the door. Craig stepped back. "There's no one in there." "I know." The pounding stopped. The observation slot, which I'd locked shut, slid open on its own. We both stared at it. From inside the room, a voice, low, hoarse, but distinctly human, said, "Let me out." Craig grabbed the logbook off the wall and flipped to the last page. A new entry had appeared, written in the same careful handwriting. 0416. Patient requests release. Denied. Restraints holding. I looked through the slot. The restraints were occupied. Someone was in them, wrists and ankles secured, lying on the mattress, facing away from the door. The figure was still. "Who is that?" Craig whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because even from behind, even in the dim light, I recognized the shape of the body, the color of the scrubs. It was me. I stepped back from the door. Craig grabbed my arm. "That's not—" "I know." The figure in the restraints turned its head. I saw my own face, pale and expressionless, staring back at me through the slot. "Let me out," it said again. I slammed the slot shut. Craig and I ran. We reported it to the night supervisor, who walked down to B Wing with us, visibly annoyed. When we reached room 4, the observation slot was open again. The supervisor looked inside. "It's empty," she said. Craig and I looked. She was right. The restraints hung loose. The mattress was back in the center of the room. "You two need to stop freaking each other out on night shift," she said, and walked away. But the logbook had one more entry, time-stamped 0423. Patient released. Awaiting next occupant. I checked the signature line at the bottom of the page. It was my name, written in my handwriting. I don't go near B-Wing anymore. I requested a transfer to day shift, but the paperwork keeps getting delayed. Every night during my rounds, I hear the knocking. It's getting closer. Last night it came from the supply closet across from the nurse's station. Tonight I heard it from inside the break room. The logbook for room 4 still updates itself. I checked it this morning. The last entry reads, "Next occupant confirmed. Restraints prepared. Patient calm." Some rooms don't wait to be filled. They simply recognize who's been assigned. Incident Report 77B documentation is our shield, our proof that we followed procedure, that we acted correctly. Every incident must be reported, every detail recorded. But what happens when the report writes itself? What do you do when the document knows what you'll say before you say it? I was typing the incident report when words I hadn't written appeared on the screen. The subject realizes she is performing compliance. I'd been a psychiatric counselor at Greenfield Behavioral Center for 3 years before I had to file Incident Report 77B. The protocol was straightforward. Any event involving patient aggression, self-harm, or acute decompensation required a written account within 24 hours. I'd filed dozens of these reports. Calm, factual summaries that would be reviewed by risk management and stored in the archive. It was bureaucratic necessity, nothing more. The incident itself occurred on a Thursday evening during group therapy. A patient named Derek Hutchins, admitted for treatment-resistant psychosis, stood up mid-session and began shouting that the staff were actors, hired to keep him trapped in a scripted facility. He claimed we were reading from invisible cues, that our empathy was rehearsed, that nothing we said was genuine. "You're performing," he kept saying, pointing at each of us. "All of you. You don't even know you're doing it." It took 3 staff members to de-escalate him. He was sedated and placed in observation. Standard procedure. I returned to my office at 2100 to write the report. I opened the incident documentation system, pulled up the blank template, and began typing. Incident Report 77B, date of incident. Thursday's date. Time 1945. Location group therapy room C-Wing involved. Patient Derek Hutchins, DOB. I paused. The cursor moved on its own. A new line of text appeared beneath what I'd written. Subject claims staff are performing scripted roles. I stared at the screen. I hadn't typed that. I checked the document history. No other users were logged in. I deleted the line and continued typing my own summary. The text reappeared. I tried again. Same result. I closed the document and reopened it. The rogue line was still there, along with a new one. Subject demonstrates insight into therapeutic framework. Claims awareness of compliance mechanisms. I picked up the phone to call IT, then set it down. The screen had updated again. Subject requests clarification regarding identity of supervising staff. I looked up at the office door. It was closed. The hallway outside was silent. I typed, "Who is writing this?" The response appeared instantly. The subject's observations are accurate. This report is being generated in real time by supervisory analysis. I pushed back from the desk. This wasn't a glitch. Someone was accessing my terminal remotely. I typed, "Identify yourself. Identification unnecessary." Subject is already aware. I yanked the network cable from the back of the computer. The screen didn't flicker. The text continued to populate. "Disconnection will not interrupt documentation. This system operates independently of network access." I held down the power button until the computer shut off. When I turned it back on, the document was already open, updated with new entries. Subject exhibits avoidance behavior. Refuses to complete report. Subject displays anxiety consistent with awareness of observation. Subject attempts to terminate session. I typed, "This isn't a session. I'm writing an incident report." "Correct." "You are writing a report about yourself." I stood up. I walked out of my office and down the hallway to the nurses' station. The night shift supervisor, Gordon, was reviewing charts. "Someone's accessing my terminal," I said. "Remotely?" "I don't know. The incident report is writing itself." He followed me back to my office. The document was still open. The screen showed a clean, properly formatted incident report. My report, written in my style, detailing the Derek Hutchins event. "Looks fine to me," Gordon said. I scrolled down. At the bottom of the page, beneath my signature line, was a new section I hadn't seen before. Supervisory addendum counselor exhibits signs of acute disorientation. Demonstrates confusion regarding role assignment. Recommends immediate evaluation for delusional projection. "I didn't write that," I said. Gordon leaned closer, reading. "It's dated today. Your login credentials." "I didn't write it." He looked at me, concerned. "When's the last time you took a day off?" I didn't answer. I minimized the document and opened my email. There was a new message in my inbox from Risk Management. Subject line, RE Incident Report 77B, follow-up required. I hadn't sent them the report yet. I opened the email. "Dr. Lawson, thank you for submitting Incident Report 77B. We've reviewed the details and have some concerns regarding your description of events. Specifically, your claim that the patient accused staff of performing scripted behaviors mirrors language you've used in previous reports. Additionally, your recent session notes suggest a pattern of projection. Please schedule a meeting with Employee Health Services at your earliest convenience." I checked the sent folder. The report was there, time-stamped 30 minutes ago. I hadn't sent it. I opened the attached file. It was my report, but expanded. Pages of detail I hadn't written describing my behavior during the incident, my tone of voice, my facial expressions. One paragraph stood out. Counselor Lawson appeared to recite responses from a memorized script. When patient challenged the authenticity of her statements, she deflected using standard de-escalation language. Patient asked, "Do you even hear yourself?" Counselor did not answer. I remembered that moment. I remembered Derek asking me that question. I didn't remember how I'd responded. I scrolled further. The report included dialogue I didn't recall saying, actions I didn't recall performing. At the end of the document was a new section. Patient assessment of staff. Patient Derek Hutchins claims Counselor Lawson exhibits following behaviors: repetitive phrasing, lack of spontaneous emotional response, inability to deviate from procedural script, appears unaware of own behavioral loops. Patient concludes, "She doesn't know she's performing." I closed the file. I looked at Gordon. "I need to see Derek. He's sedated. I need to see him now." Gordon escorted me to the observation unit. Derek was lying in bed, eyes half open, groggy from medication. I stood at the foot of the bed. "Derek, can you hear me?" He nodded slowly. "When you said we were performing, what did you mean?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You still don't get it," he said. "Get what?" "You're reading from the same script you always read from. You ask the same questions, you give the same answers. You think you're helping, but you're just repeating." "I'm not." "You are. You've done this before. You've had this exact conversation before. You just don't remember." I stepped back. "That's not true." He closed his eyes. "Check your old reports. You'll see." I went to the records room and pulled my previous incident filings. 15 reports over 3 years. I read through them. The language was identical. The phrasing, the structure, even the specific details, repeated across different patients, different incidents. I'd written the same report 15 times. I returned to my office. The computer was still on. The document had updated. Final entry: subject has completed recognition phase. Subject now aware of scripted behavior. Integration protocol initiated. Subject identity: Dr. Rebecca Lawson, psychiatric counselor. Actual status: patient 77B. Admitted 6 months prior. Diagnosis: dissociative fugue state with occupational delusion. Treatment: therapeutic role play to facilitate identity reintegration. Outcome: subject demonstrates insight. Recommend transition to next phase. The document saved itself. A new file appeared on my desktop. Patient file, Rebecca Lawson. I opened it. Inside was my photo, my intake paperwork, my treatment plan. The diagnosis section read, "Patient believes she is a staff counselor. Engages in role play to avoid confronting traumatic memory. Allow performance to continue until self-awareness emerges." I don't work at Greenfield anymore, or maybe I do. I'm not sure which side of the desk I'm supposed to be on. They still let me write reports. They say it helps. Some documents don't wait for our signatures. They simply record what we've already agreed to. Patient transfer transport is routine. Patients moved between facilities for higher levels of care, for medical clearance, for safety. We sedate them, secure them, and drive. The paperwork says where they've been and where they're going. But what happens when the transfer happened yesterday, yet the body is still warm? What if the radio knows your name before you turn it on? The transfer log said we'd moved the patient yesterday. But I was holding her wrist, feeling her pulse, and her skin was warm. I started my psychiatric internship at Fairmont State Hospital in January. Most of my duties were observational, shadowing senior staff, learning protocols, assisting with intake. But twice a week I was assigned to patient transport, accompanying sedated or high-risk individuals during transfers to other facilities. It was straightforward work, necessary work, the kind of task that taught you to stay calm under pressure. The night it happened, I was paired with Martin, a transport technician who'd been doing this for 15 years. We were scheduled to move a patient from Fairmont to Lakewood Medical Center, a 40-minute drive. The patient, identified only as female, age 34, had been cleared for medical evaluation after an acute psychotic episode. She'd been sedated, placed on a gurney, and loaded into the transport van by the time I arrived. Martin handed me the transfer paperwork. I scanned it while he secured the gurney. Transfer date, previous day's date. Time of departures 0300, destination Lakewood Medical Center. Status complete. I looked up. This says the transfer already happened. Typo, Martin said, not looking up. Admin always screws up the dates. Just initial it. I checked the patient. She was lying on her back, restrained at the wrists and ankles, a blanket pulled up to her chest. Her eyes were closed, her breathing slow and even. I touched her wrist to check her pulse. Her skin was warm. Not room temperature warm, body heat warm, alive warm. I looked at the paperwork again. Status, complete. Martin, this says the transfer was completed yesterday. So why are we moving her now? He shrugged. Someone probably rerouted her. Happens all the time. I didn't argue. I climbed into the back of the van with the patient while Martin took the driver's seat. The doors closed and we pulled out of the loading bay. The van had no windows in the back, just the gurney, a bench seat, and a small monitor mounted on the wall showing the patient's vitals. Heart rate, 62. Blood pressure, 110/70. Oxygen, 98%. Everything stable. I sat on the bench and reviewed the transfer notes. The more I read, the less sense it made. Departure time, 0300. Arrival time, 0345. Transferring staff, Martin Colby, Dr. Rebecca Hale. I wasn't Dr. Hale, I was an intern, and the transfer supposedly happened 12 hours ago. I leaned forward and knocked on the partition separating the cabin from the cargo area. Martin slid it open. Yeah? Who's Dr. Hale? You. No, I'm an intern. My name's Rebecca, but I'm not a doctor. He glanced at the paperwork clipped to the visor. Says here, Dr. Rebecca Hale. That's you, right? I'm not... Look, I don't care what your title is. Just keep an eye on her and let me know if anything changes. He slid the partition shut. I sat back. The van's radio crackled to life, playing a local news station. Traffic report, weather. I wasn't paying attention. Then I heard my name. Not Rebecca. My full name. First and last. I leaned closer to the partition. The radio was playing hospital announcements, the kind you'd hear over an intercom. Dr. Rebecca Hale, report to Transport Bay. Dr. Rebecca Hale, patient transfer in progress. I knocked on the partition again. Martin opened it. Where's that broadcast coming from? What broadcast? The hospital announcements on the radio. He listened. The radio was playing a commercial for a furniture store. You okay back there? I nodded. He closed the partition. I checked the patient. Still unconscious, still stable. The radio crackled again. Static, then a voice. Calm, procedural, like a dispatch operator. Transport unit en route. Patient status sedated. Estimated arrival 0345. I looked at my watch. It was 2100. Dr. Hale, confirm receipt. I didn't respond. Dr. Hale, confirm receipt. The voice was coming from the van's speaker system now, not the radio. I pressed the intercom button. Martin, are you hearing this? No response. The patient's monitor flickered. The heart rate spiked to 110, then dropped to 40, then returned to 62. I leaned over the gurney. The patient's eyes were open. She was staring at me. You already did this, she said. What? You already moved me yesterday. You sat right there. She nodded toward the bench. I wasn't here yesterday. You were. You wore the same jacket. You asked Martin the same questions. I stepped back. You're sedated. You shouldn't be conscious. She smiled faintly. I'm not. Neither are you. The van stopped. The back doors opened. Martin stood outside, clipboard in hand. Behind him was the entrance to Lakewood Medical Center. We're here, he said. I looked at my watch. It was 3:45. That's impossible. We left at 2100. Martin checked his watch. No, we left at 3:00. You were asleep for most of it. I climbed out of the van. The sky was dark, pre-dawn dark. The parking lot was empty except for our van. I wasn't asleep. Martin ignored me. He wheeled the gurney into the building. I followed, my head spinning. Inside, a nurse met us at the intake desk. She checked the paperwork and nodded. "Second time this week," she said. "What?" I asked. "Same patient, same transfer. We sent her back yesterday because the paperwork was wrong. Guess they corrected it." "We transferred her yesterday?" "You did. You and Martin. I checked her in myself." I looked at Martin. He was filling out the arrival log, completely unfazed. The nurse handed me a copy of yesterday's intake form. My signature was at the bottom. I didn't remember signing it. I didn't remember being here. The patient was wheeled away. Martin and I returned to the van. On the drive back, the radio played the same announcements, the same traffic report, the same weather. Then, at exactly 04:05, my name again. Dr. Rebecca Hale, report to Transport Bay. Patient transfer in progress. I checked the transfer log. There was a new entry dated tomorrow. Patient, female, age 34. Transferring staff, Martin Colby, Dr. Rebecca Hale. Status, in progress. I don't do patient transports anymore. I requested reassignment, but every night at 0300 I wake up in the back of a van. The patient is always there, always staring, always saying the same thing. "You already did this." And the radio always knows my name. Some routes don't have destinations. They just replay the same miles until you stop counting. The intake interview. Intake is where it all begins. The first interview, the first assessment, the moment we try to understand who someone is and why they've come to us. We ask questions, we listen, we document. But what happens when the patient knows your answers before you speak them? What if the recorder transcribes thoughts you never said aloud? Halfway through the intake interview, the patient began reciting my private thoughts verbatim. The recorder was still running, transcribing words I'd never spoken. I conducted intake interviews at Northfield Psychiatric Center 3 evenings a week. The process was standardized. Greet the patient, review their referral paperwork, conduct a structured clinical interview, document their responses, and generate a preliminary diagnostic impression. I'd done hundreds of these. The routine was comforting. Predictable questions, predictable answers, predictable outcomes. The patient who changed that arrived on a Tuesday evening with minimal documentation. The referral form listed only a first name, Evan, and a vague note, voluntary admission, requests evaluation, no history, no prior records, no emergency contact. I met him in interview room 3, a small windowless space with 2 chairs, a desk, and a digital voice recorder I used to capture session audio for transcription. He was already seated when I arrived, hands folded on the table, posture unnervingly still. "Good evening," I said, setting down my clipboard. "I'm Dr. Renner. I'll be conducting your intake interview tonight." He nodded but didn't speak. I activated the recorder. "This session is being recorded for documentation purposes. Do you consent?" "Yes." I began with the standard questions: name, age, reason for seeking treatment. He answered each one calmly with minimal elaboration. His responses were appropriate but oddly flat, as if he were reading from a script he'd memorized. 20 minutes in, I asked, "Have you experienced any auditory hallucinations?" He paused. Then he said, "You're wondering if I can hear your thoughts." I blinked. "Excuse me? Right now you're thinking that I'm too calm, that something about this interview feels off. You're wondering if you should flag me for further observation." My chest tightened. Those were my exact thoughts. "I'm asking about hallucinations," I said carefully. "Do you hear voices?" "No, but you do." "I don't. You hear your own voice constantly narrating, judging. Right now it's telling you to stay professional, to not react." I put down my pen. "How do you know that?" He tilted his head. "Because you're thinking it very loudly." I glanced at the recorder. The red light was on, the timer running. "Let's move on," I said, keeping my voice steady. Have you had any thoughts of harming yourself or others? He smiled faintly. You're not writing this down because you're scared. You think if you document it, it becomes real. I hadn't written anything. He was right. I picked up my pen, forced myself to make a note. Patient claims to perceive interviewer's thoughts. Possible delusion of reference. You just wrote possible delusion of reference, he said. I stared at him. How? You're also wondering if someone briefed me on your interview style. If this is some kind of test. It was. That was exactly what I was thinking. I stopped writing. I turned off the recorder. This interview is over, I said. No, it's not. You're going to keep going because you need to know if I'm right. I stood. I'm calling my supervisor. You won't. You're afraid of how it will sound. The patient read my mind. You'll seem unstable. I sat back down. He was right. I turned the recorder back on. My hands were shaking. How are you doing this? I asked. I'm not doing anything. You're broadcasting. That's not possible. You think that, but you also think about the patients you've diagnosed with telepathic delusions. One, you think about how convinced they were. You think about how you dismissed them. I dismissed dozens. I looked at the recorder. The digital display showed the session length. 34 minutes. I pressed rewind and played back the last 30 seconds. My voice. Have you had any thoughts of harming yourself or others? His voice. You're not writing this down because you're scared. Then underneath his voice, barely audible, another voice. My voice whispering, don't write it. Don't make it real. But I hadn't said that aloud. I stopped the playback. I looked at Evan. The recorder is picking up my thoughts. Yes. How? Because you're not conducting this interview. You're a subject in it. I stood again, knocking the chair back. That's not true. Check your paperwork. I looked down at the clipboard. The intake form was filled out. Patient name, age, referral source. But the name wasn't Evan's. It was mine. Patient, Dr. Marcus Renner. Reason for admission, acute delusional disorder. Believes he is conducting intake interviews. Insists he is employed as a psychiatrist. I flipped the page. The rest of the form was completed in my handwriting, detailing a psychiatric history I didn't have, medications I wasn't taking, a breakdown I didn't remember. This is wrong, I said. You've been here for 3 weeks, Evan said. They let you do the interviews because it keeps you calm. You think you're working. You think you're a doctor. I am a doctor. Show me your badge. I reached for my lanyard. It wasn't there. I checked my pockets. No ID, no keys, no phone. Where's my badge? You don't have one. You're a patient. I looked at the recorder. The display had changed. Instead of showing session time, it now displayed text, scrolling automatically. Subject exhibiting increased agitation. Subject denies patient status. Subject requesting identification. I hadn't said any of that aloud. The recorder is transcribing my thoughts, I whispered. It's transcribing the session. You're just finally noticing. I grabbed the recorder and tried to turn it off. The button didn't respond. The text kept scrolling. Subject attempting to disable monitoring equipment. Subject displays poor reality testing. Recommend continued observation. I threw the recorder across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor. The display stayed on. The text continued. Evan stood. They'll come for you soon. They always do when the subject realizes. Realizes what? That the interview never ends. You just switch sides of the desk. The door opened. 2 orderlies stepped in, calm and professional. Dr. Renner, one of them said gently, it's time to go back to your room. I don't have a room. I work here. We know you believe that, but you need to come with us. I looked at Evan. He was picking up the clipboard, reviewing the intake form. "Good session," he said. The orderlies guided me out. I didn't resist. I couldn't. As they walked me down the hallway, I saw my name on a door. Patient room 10, Dr. Marcus Renner. Inside, a bed, a chair, a small desk. On the desk, a digital recorder. The display was on, still transcribing. Some interviews never finish. They just keep recording long after we stop speaking. The unscheduled visit audits are part of the system. Regulators arrive, they review our records, they ensure compliance. We prepare, we cooperate, we document everything. But what happens when the inspector's clipboard lists sessions you haven't conducted yet? What if the audit was never scheduled and your name is already in the discharge log? The inspector's clipboard showed treatment notes from sessions I hadn't yet conducted. When the audit ended, my name was in the patient discharge log. I'd been the staff psychiatrist at Riverside Behavioral Health for 9 years when the inspector arrived. I was in my office finishing a chart review when my desk phone rang. It was reception. "Dr. Halston, there's someone here for you, says he's conducting a facility audit." I frowned. "We don't have an audit scheduled." "I know, but he has credentials, state licensure board." I asked her to send him up. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. The man who entered was in his 50s, wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather-bound clipboard. He introduced himself as Inspector Raymond Gaines and handed me a laminated ID card from the Department of Mental Health Services. "I apologize for the short notice," he said. "This is part of a randomized compliance review. Shouldn't take more than an hour." I checked the ID. It looked legitimate. "I wasn't notified," I said. "Randomized reviews aren't announced in advance. Ensures authenticity of records." I nodded. It made sense, even if it was inconvenient. He sat across from my desk and opened his clipboard. "I'll need to review your recent treatment documentation. Let's start with patient charts from the last 2 weeks." I pulled the files. He flipped through them methodically, making notes on a form I couldn't quite see. "Dr. Halston," he said after a few minutes, "I notice you've been seeing a patient named Victor Lang." "Yes, he was admitted last Monday." "And you conducted an initial evaluation on Tuesday?" "That's correct." He held up his clipboard, showing me a printed form. "This is your session note from that evaluation. Can you confirm this is accurate?" I leaned forward to read it. The note was mine, my phrasing, my clinical language, but the session it described hadn't happened yet. The form was dated for tomorrow. "This is dated wrong," I said. "Is the content accurate?" I haven't conducted that session yet." He made a mark on his form. "Interesting. And what about this one?" He showed me another note, same issue, dated 3 days from now. But the details, the patient's responses, my clinical impressions, were written as if the session had already occurred. "I don't understand," I said. "Where did you get these?" "From your file," he said calmly. "They're part of your clinical record." "That's impossible. I haven't written them yet." "But you will." I sat back. "Who authorized this audit?" He consulted his clipboard. "You did. 2 weeks ago, you submitted a self-report regarding documentation irregularities." "I never submitted a self-report." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a formal request for review signed with my name, dated 14 days prior. The handwriting was mine. "I didn't write this," I said. "Then who did?" I didn't have an answer. He continued reviewing files. Every few minutes, he'd show me another session note, always dated in the future, always describing appointments I hadn't yet conducted. "Dr. Halston, I need to ask you a direct question. Have you been experiencing any cognitive difficulties, memory lapses, temporal disorientation?" No. Are you certain? Because these notes suggest a pattern of documented sessions occurring before they've been scheduled. I'm not writing notes for sessions that haven't happened. Then how do you explain this? He showed me a progress note dated 1 week from now. The content described a discharge planning session with a patient I was currently treating. The note concluded, patient stable. Recommend discharge to outpatient care. Dr. Halston concurs. I stared at it. The clinical reasoning was sound. The language was mine, but I hadn't written it. I need to speak with my supervisor, I said. Your supervisor is unavailable. She's attending a conference. Then I'm ending this audit. You can't. It's mandatory once initiated. I stood. I'm calling licensure to confirm your credentials. Go ahead. I picked up the phone. There was no dial tone. I tried my cell, no signal. Inspector Gaines didn't react. He simply turned a page on his clipboard and continued. Let's move on, he said. I need to review your self-assessment. I didn't complete a self-assessment. He handed me a multi-page form. At the top, in bold print, Physician Self-Assessment, Dr. Jonathan Halston. The form was filled out, detailed responses to questions about my mental health, my caseload, my ability to perform clinical duties. One section stood out. Do you ever feel as though you are observing your work from outside yourself, as though you are watching someone else perform your duties? The answer, in my handwriting, yes, frequently. I'd never felt that way. Another question. Do you believe you are currently fit to continue practicing? The answer, no. I believe I require evaluation. I didn't write this, I said. It's dated and signed. Someone forged it. Who? I didn't answer. He closed the clipboard and stood. Dr. Halston, based on this review, I'm recommending you for a mandatory fitness evaluation. You'll be placed on administrative leave pending assessment. You can't do that. I can. And I am. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. You'll need to complete your discharge paperwork. Discharge paperwork? I'm not being discharged. I'm staff. He consulted his clipboard one last time. According to this, you were admitted as a patient 6 months ago. Your discharge is scheduled for today. He showed me the page. At the top, patient discharge summary. Halfway down, patient name, Dr. Jonathan Halston. At the bottom, treating physician, Dr. Jonathan Halston. I'd signed it. I looked at the date. Today. That's not real, I said. It's in your file. I don't have a patient file. I'm a doctor. You were. Now you're transitioning back to outpatient status. The role-play therapy has been helpful, but it's time to reintegrate. I stepped back. This is insane, he nodded. That was your presenting complaint. I ran. I left my office, walked down the hallway, and went to administration. I demanded to see the director. The receptionist checked her computer. Dr. Halston, you're not scheduled to be here today. You're on leave. I'm not on leave. She showed me the screen. My name marked administrative leave, effective immediately. I went to the staff lounge. My nameplate was gone from the mailbox. I went to the parking lot. My assigned space was empty, reassigned to someone else. I checked my wallet. My hospital ID was missing. I returned to my office. The door was locked. Through the window, I could see someone else sitting at my desk. I knocked. The person looked up. It was me. I was sitting at my desk reviewing charts, exactly as I'd been doing an hour ago. The other me looked at the door, made eye contact, and smiled, then returned to work. I don't know where I am now. I'm writing this in a room that looks like my office, but the name on the door isn't mine. Every morning I receive a new session note, dated in the future, describing work I haven't done yet. And every evening Inspector Gaines returns, checking my progress. Some audits don't review the past. They confirm what we've already been scheduled to become. The therapy doll exposure therapy uses gradual desensitization, confronting fears in controlled increments until they lose their power. We use props, simulations, tools. The therapy doll is one of them, lifelike, designed to mimic breathing, to help patients confront their anxieties about human presence. But what happens when the doll activates on its own? What if its features begin to change, reflecting yours? The therapy doll started breathing before I turned it on. Each session, its features adjusted slightly, closer to my own. When I left one evening, it was sitting in my chair. I began using the Real Sim therapy doll as part of exposure treatment at Maplewood Behavioral Clinic in the fall. The doll was a high-end model designed to help patients with social anxiety, agoraphobia, or trauma-related avoidance. It was eerily realistic, silicone skin, articulated joints, weighted to feel human. The key feature was its breathing mechanism, a motorized diaphragm that simulated slow rhythmic breathing to create a calming, lifelike presence. The idea was simple. Patients who couldn't tolerate being near real people could start with the doll. Gradual exposure, safe, controlled, effective. I named it Sam, neutral, non-threatening. The first few sessions went well. Patients sat across from Sam, practiced breathing exercises, and slowly built tolerance for proximity. The doll worked exactly as advertised. Then, one Thursday afternoon, I entered the therapy room to prep for a session and found Sam already breathing. I stopped in the doorway. The chest was rising and falling, slowly, evenly. I hadn't turned it on. I checked the control unit mounted in the doll's back. The switch was off. I flipped it on, then off again. The breathing continued. I unplugged the battery pack. The breathing didn't stop. I called the manufacturer. They walked me through a diagnostic reset. I followed the steps exactly. When I finished, the breathing paused for 5 seconds, then resumed. "Sounds like a mechanical fault," the tech said. "Ship it back and we'll replace it." I scheduled a pickup for the following week and moved Sam to the storage closet. That night, I heard breathing in my office. I opened the closet door. Sam was sitting upright, chest rising and falling. I shoved it into a cabinet and locked it. The next morning, Sam was back in the therapy room, seated in the patient chair. I asked my colleagues if anyone had moved it. No one had. I checked the security footage. At 0300, the closet door opened on its own. Sam stood, walked to the therapy room, and sat down. The footage was clear. The movements were fluid, deliberate. I reported it to my supervisor. She watched the footage, said nothing for a long moment, then told me to stop using the doll until the replacement arrived. I agreed. But that afternoon, I had a session scheduled with a patient named Claire, who'd been making progress with Sam. I didn't want to disrupt her treatment. I brought Sam back to the therapy room. Claire sat across from it, practicing her breathing exercises. Everything seemed normal. Then halfway through the session, Claire stopped. "Why does it look like you?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "The doll. Its face. It looks like you." I looked at Sam. The face was the same generic neutral features it had always had. Soft, androgynous, unremarkable. "It doesn't look like me," I said. "Yes, it does. The nose, the eyes. It's your face." I stepped closer. She was right. The doll's nose had a slight asymmetry, the same asymmetry as mine. The left eye sat fractionally higher than the right, just like mine. That's not possible," I said. Claire stood. "I don't want to do this anymore." She left. I locked the therapy room and examined Sam under the overhead light. The resemblance was subtle but undeniable. The features had shifted. The silicone had somehow adjusted. I took photos. I compared them to the product manual. The doll in the manual had a generic face. The doll in front of me had mine. I called the manufacturer again. I sent them the photos. They said it was impossible. Silicone doesn't change shape without heat molding. I put Sam back in the storage closet and locked it with a padlock. The next morning, the padlock was on the floor, unopened. Sam was sitting in my office chair, facing my desk. I stood in the doorway, staring. The doll turned its head to look at me. The movement was smooth, deliberate. Its eyes, my eyes, tracked me as I stepped into the room. "Stop," I said aloud. It didn't. I grabbed it by the shoulders and shoved it back into the closet. I locked the door. I pushed a filing cabinet in front of it. At 16:00, I heard breathing in my office again. I moved the cabinet. I opened the closet, empty. I turned around. Sam was sitting at my desk, hands folded, staring at me. I ran. I reported everything to my supervisor. She had the doll removed from the building. A disposal company picked it up that evening. I watched them load it into a van. When I returned to my office, there was a note on my desk, handwritten in my handwriting. "You can't get rid of yourself. I don't work at Maplewood anymore. But last week I saw Sam in a therapy catalog. New model, different name. The face in the product photo was mine. Some tools don't just mimic us. They practice until they're ready to take our place." The observation room. They promised the cameras never lie. They told us surveillance protects both patient and staff, but no one warned me what happens when the lens sees more than the room contains. No one prepared me for the moment I'd watch myself from the wrong side of the glass. I was staring at my own face on the monitor when I realized I was still standing in the hallway. I'd been a psychiatric nurse at Millbrook Behavioral Center for 7 years before I met patient 4J. That's not his real designation, of course. Privacy laws and all. But it's what I'll call him here. He came to us on a Tuesday during second shift, sedated heavily after an episode at County General. The intake notes were sparse: male, mid-30s, nonverbal, history of dissociative episodes. Standard protocol for high observation cases: continuous video monitoring, 15-minute physical checks, restraints as needed. The observation room was at the end of C-Wing, a narrow corridor we called the sleeve because of how it seemed to tighten around you the farther you walked. Room 4 had a reinforced door with a small wire glass window and a camera mounted in the upper corner, angled to capture the entire space. The feed ran to a monitor bank at the nurses' station where I spent most of my shift, watching 6 different screens cycle through the ward's high-risk areas. Patient 4J's screen was the third from the left. For the first 4 hours, he didn't move. The sedation held him flat on his back, arms loose at his sides, chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of chemical sleep. I documented his status every quarter hour like clockwork. 19:00, no change. 19:15, no change. 19:30, no change. The routine was comforting, predictable. I'd done this hundreds of times. At 19:45, I glanced at the screen during my documentation round and froze. His eyes were open, not groggily half open or confused, wide open, pupils fixed, staring directly at the camera. I checked the timestamp. The feed was live, but his body position hadn't changed. He hadn't moved his head or shifted his weight, just the eyes suddenly open as if someone had flipped a switch. I radioed Darren, the orderly on duty. "Can you do a visual on room 4? Something's off." "Copy, 2 minutes." I watched the screen while I waited. Patient 4J didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. The camera was high enough that patients usually couldn't make direct eye contact with it unless they stood on the bed, but somehow his gaze locked perfectly onto the lens. It felt personal, targeted. Darren's voice crackled back. "All clear." He's out cold, breathing normal. You're looking at him right now? Yeah, standing right outside the window, totally still. Why? I looked at the monitor. The patient's eyes were still open, still staring. Never mind, I said. Must be the playback looping. But I knew it wasn't. The timestamp was current. The seconds ticked forward in real time. I called IT. They said they'd send someone in the morning. Probably a glitch in the refresh rate, the tech told me. The image gets stuck sometimes. I wanted to believe that. I logged the issue and moved on with my shift. At 21:00, I ran the playback to document the earlier sedation check. Standard procedure, review the footage, confirm the patient's status matched the written log. I scrolled back to 1945 and pressed play. In the recording, patient 4J's eyes were open. But this time, when I advanced the footage to 1947, the moment Darren had checked the room, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Darren appeared in the frame, visible through the door's window, looking in. And in the bed, patient 4J lay exactly as Darren described. Eyes closed, motionless, sedated. But on the monitor in front of me, the live feed still showed his eyes open. I checked the timestamp on the playback. I checked the timestamp on the live feed. Both read the same time down to the second. Two versions of the same moment, two different realities. I went to C-Wing myself. The hallway was empty, the lights buzzing faintly overhead. I stopped outside room 4 and looked through the wire glass window. Patient 4J was gone. The bed was empty. The restraints hung loose. The room was undisturbed, as if no one had ever been there. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The mattress was still slightly depressed where his weight had been. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and sweat. But the space was vacant. I turned to leave and caught sight of the camera in the corner. Its red recording light was on. I walked back to the nurse's station, my heart pounding, and looked at the monitor bank. On screen 3, patient 4J's room was no longer empty. I was in it. I was standing exactly where I'd just been standing, facing the camera, my expression unreadable. I watched myself on the screen, and the figure in the feed didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there staring back. I looked down at my hands. I was in the hallway. I was at the nurse's station. I wasn't in that room, but the screen said otherwise. I reached for the radio to call Darren, and the figure on the monitor reached at the same time. I stepped back. It stepped back. I moved my hand to my face, and it mirrored me perfectly, but delayed just by half a second like an echo. Then it stopped mirroring. I stood still, and the figure on the screen turned its head slowly to the left, toward the door I'd just exited. It walked out of frame. The hallway behind me was silent. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I looked at the patient log on the desk, the intake paperwork for 4J. The admission form was still there, but something had changed. Under patient name, the line was blank. Under assigned nurse, it now read my name. And at the bottom of the page, in the section reserved for attending physician notes, someone had written in careful block letters, "Roles switched. Observation continuing." The monitor flickered. When the image stabilized, the room was empty again. The bed, the restraints, the blank walls, all exactly as they should be. But in the corner of the screen, just visible in the shadows near the door, I could see the edge of a figure standing motionless, watching. I filed my report. I logged the incident. I waited for my shift to end. But when I tried to leave at 0700, my badge wouldn't open the exterior door. The system flagged me as an active patient under observation. They told me it was an administrative error. They told me they'd fix it by tomorrow. I'm still waiting. The cameras are always running. And somewhere in the building, I know there's a monitor showing a room I've never seen. with someone wearing my face watching a feed of a nurse who doesn't remember how she got there. Sometimes the system updates faster than we do. Sometimes the records know who we are before we're ready to admit it. We use mirrors to confirm identity, to anchor the self to the body it inhabits. In psychiatry, the mirror test measures self-recognition, a marker of consciousness, of wholeness. But what happens when the reflection doesn't agree? What if the person staring back has been waiting longer than you've been looking? My reflection blinked 3 seconds after I did. By the time I noticed, it had already started smiling. I joined the research team at Pine Ridge Psychiatric Institute specifically to work on Dr. Calloway's dissociative identity study. The project was elegant in its simplicity. Use controlled mirror exposure to measure self-recognition latency in patients with severe dissociative disorders. The theory was that fractured identities would show delayed or inconsistent recognition responses when confronted with their own reflection. We'd publish, secure funding, maybe even shift the diagnostic criteria. It felt important. The testing room was small and clinically bare. White walls, white floor, a single chair facing a large two-way mirror. Patients sat in the chair while I observed from the adjacent room, recording their reactions, their hesitations, their moments of confusion or clarity. Most sessions were unremarkable. Patients looked, recognized themselves, and moved on. Some cried, some dissociated. One woman insisted the reflection was her sister, but no one reacted like patient 19. He was admitted on a Tuesday involuntary hold after being found unresponsive in a downtown parking garage. No ID, no history in our system, no fingerprint matches. He wouldn't speak, wouldn't write, just sat silently in his room staring at the wall with an expression that wasn't quite blank, more like waiting. Dr. Calloway assigned him to me for baseline testing. "Let's see if he recognizes himself," she said. "Sometimes that's the first crack in the wall." I brought him to the testing room at 1400. He walked calmly, didn't resist, didn't react to the environment. I seated him in the chair facing the mirror and stepped into the observation room. "Can you tell me who you see?" I asked through the intercom. He looked at the mirror. Then he looked directly at the two-way glass, at me, even though he shouldn't have been able to see through it. "That's not me," he said, his first words since admission. "Who is it?" "You." I glanced at the mirror. My reflection stood in the observation room, clipboard in hand, exactly as I was standing. "I'm not in that mirror," I said carefully. "You are." He shook his head slowly. "You're in every mirror. You just don't look long enough to see." I made a note. Possible deflection. Projection onto examiner. Standard defensive behavior in identity disrupted patients. "Let's try this," I said. "Raise your right hand." He didn't move. In the mirror, his reflection raised its right hand. I stared. The patient sat motionless, but in the glass, his reflection's arm was elevated, fingers spread. "Did you see that?" I asked. "I didn't do it," he said. "Then who did?" "The one who's been here longer." I stopped the session. I reviewed the video recording. The footage showed exactly what I'd seen. The patient still, the reflection moving independently. I brought it to Dr. Calloway. She watched in silence, then replayed it twice. "Camera artifact," she finally said. "The frame rate must be desynced from the mirror's reflection angle. I've seen it before." "Both cameras caught it," I said. "The observation room and the in-room backup. Then both cameras have the same defect. We'll recalibrate." But she didn't sound convinced. The next day, I tested patient 19 again, this time with new equipment and a handheld digital recorder as a third reference. Same setup, same chair, same mirror. "Look at yourself," I said. He looked. I looked. For 5 seconds, everything matched. Then his reflection blinked. He hadn't blinked. I checked my own eyes, thinking I'd imagined it. But the reflection blinked again. Slow, deliberate. The patient's actual eyes stayed open. "Do you see that?" I whispered. "I told you," he said. "It's not me." I stepped closer to the two-way glass, staring at the mirror in the testing room. The reflection's mouth moved. I couldn't hear what it said, but I could read the lips. "Switch." The patient stood up. I hadn't told him he could move. He walked to the mirror and pressed his palm flat against it. His reflection didn't mirror the movement. It stayed seated. I ran into the testing room. The patient was standing at the mirror, hand on the glass, staring at his seated reflection. "Step back," I said. He turned to look at me. "It's your turn now." "My turn for what?" He pointed at the mirror. I looked. My reflection wasn't in the observation room anymore. It was sitting in the chair. I spun around. The chair was empty. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection sat calmly, hands folded, watching me. I stepped to the left. My reflection didn't move. I raised my hand. It stayed still. I moved closer to the glass and my reflection leaned back slightly as if making room. Then it smiled. I don't smile like that. The expression was mine, my face, my eyes. But the intent behind it was foreign, like someone wearing a mask they'd studied but didn't quite understand. "Who are you?" I asked. My reflection's lips moved. No sound, but the words were clear. "I've been you longer than you have." I backed away. The patient was gone. The room was empty except for me and the mirror. I left. I locked the door. I went to my office and wrote up the session report, hands shaking so badly I could barely type. But when I reviewed what I'd written, the text wasn't mine. The report detailed a session I hadn't conducted, a session where I was the patient, sitting in the chair, refusing to acknowledge my reflection, insisting I was the doctor. The notes were thorough, professional, written in my style. At the bottom, in the section for examiner observations, there was a single line. "Subject demonstrates persistent dissociation, believes she is conducting the study. Recommend continued mirror exposure until integration occurs." I tried to delete it. The text regenerated. I tried to close the file. It auto-saved. I shut down my computer. When I restarted it, the report was already open with a new addendum. "Subject becoming agitated, shows poor insight, may require medication adjustment." I looked up. My office has a small mirror on the wall beside my degrees, just a decorative piece, something I'd hung years ago and stopped noticing. I was standing in front of my desk. My reflection was sitting in my chair, typing. I haven't looked in a mirror since. I avoid reflective surfaces. I keep my eyes down in the bathroom. I eat in my office with the lights off. But this morning I found a photo attachment in my email. No sender, no subject line, just an image. It showed the testing room, the chair, the mirror, and sitting in the chair facing the glass was me. Standing behind the glass, in the observation room, clipboard in hand, was also me. Both versions were smiling. The timestamp on the photo is today's date, but I haven't been to the testing room in weeks. Some reflections don't wait for permission. They've been practicing longer than we've been looking. Medication rounds are the rhythm of psychiatric care. Pills distributed in small paper cups, names checked against wristbands, compliance documented. It's a ritual of order, of treatment, of control. But what happens when the same face appears in multiple rooms? What do you do when the pills in your cart aren't prescribed to the patients, but to you? I found the same patient in 3 different rooms at once. When I checked my medication cart, every cup was filled with pills prescribed in my name. Evening medication rounds at Riverside Psychiatric Hospital began at 1800 sharp. I'd been a psych nurse there for 4 years, long enough that the routine had become muscle memory. Roll the locked med cart down the hallway, stop at each room, verify the patient's identity, dispense the prescribed pills, watch them swallow, document compliance. 32 patients, 60 medications, 90 minutes if nothing went wrong. Nothing ever went wrong. The night it started, I was on E-Wing, the long-term stabilization unit. I rolled my cart to room 12 and knocked twice before entering. The patient, a woman named Alice Brennan, sat on her bed facing the window. She didn't turn when I came in. "Evening meds, Alice," I said, checking her wristband against the chart. Name, date of birth, medical record number, all matched. I handed her the cup, 2 white tablets, 1 yellow capsule. She took them without looking at me and swallowed them dry. "Open up," I said. She opened her mouth, empty. I documented compliance and moved to room 13. The patient in room 13 was also Alice Brennan. Same build, same gown, same posture, sitting on the bed facing the window. I stopped in the doorway. "Alice?" She didn't turn. I checked the nameplate on the door. Room 13, Jacob Lowell. But the woman sitting on the bed was Alice. I backed into the hallway and looked at room 12. The door was still ajar. I could see Alice sitting on the bed exactly as I'd left her. I walked back into room 13. The woman turned to face me. It was Alice. Same face, same eyes. "Evening meds," she said in my voice. I didn't respond. I checked her wristband. The name read Jacob Lowell, but the face was Alice's. "You already took your medication," I said carefully. "No," she said. "That was her." "Her?" She pointed to room 12. I went back to room 12. Alice was still there, still facing the window. "Alice, did you just take your meds?" "Yes. Do you feel okay?" "I'm fine." I returned to room 13. Alice, wearing Jacob's wristband, was still sitting on the bed. "I need to see the charge nurse," I said, and left the room. I found Denise at the nurse's station. "Something's wrong with room 13. "What kind of wrong?" "There's a patient in there who shouldn't be." "Jacob Lowell? He's been there all week." "It's not Jacob, it's Alice Brennan." Denise frowned. "Alice is in room 12. "I know. She's in both." Denise followed me back to E-Wing. We checked room 12 first. Alice sitting on the bed facing the window. We checked room 13. Jacob Lowell, a man in his 50s with a gray beard, sat on the bed facing the window. No sign of Alice. "You're working too many doubles," Denise said. I didn't argue. I finished the med round and went home. The next evening it happened again. Room 12, Alice Brennan. Room 13, Alice Brennan. Room 14, Alice Brennan. Same woman, same posture, same blank stare. I stopped the med cart in the hallway and radioed security. "I need someone on E-Wing. Now." 2 officers arrived. I showed them room 12. Alice was there. I showed them room 13. Alice was there. I showed them room 14. Alice was there. The officers looked at each other. One of them checked the wristbands. Each one showed a different name, a different patient. "They just look similar," one officer said. "They're identical," he shrugged. "Patients get confused. They wander. We'll sort it out." But when I checked the medication administration records for all 3 rooms, each one showed that I had already dispensed meds to the correct patient at the exact same time. 1812, Alice Brennan, room 12, compliance confirmed. 1812, Jacob Lowell, room 13, compliance confirmed. 1812, Lisa Havens, room 14. Compliance confirmed. I hadn't been in all 3 rooms at once, but the documentation said I had. I checked my med cart. The next patient on my list was room 15. I opened the drawer and pulled out the pre-filled cup. The label read, Emily Carter, RN, evening dose, my name. I checked the pills, antipsychotic, mood stabilizer, sedative. Medications I didn't take, medications I'd never been prescribed. I checked the next cup, same label, same pills. I checked every cup in the cart, all of them had my name. I radioed Denise. Someone tampered with the med cart. What do you mean? Every cup is labeled with my name. Silence. Then, stay there, I'm coming. She arrived, checked the cart, and frowned. Emily, these are all correct, look. She held up a cup. The label read Alice Brennan. I looked at the cup in my hand. It now read Alice Brennan too. You okay? Denise asked. I didn't answer. She walked me to the break room and sat me down. You've been off lately, have you been sleeping? I'm fine. You don't look fine. I looked at my reflection in the break room window. I was wearing scrubs. My badge was clipped to my chest, but in the reflection I was wearing a patient gown. I blinked. The reflection corrected itself. Scrubs again. I need to finish the med round, I said. Denise hesitated, then nodded. I'll walk with you. We went back to E-Wing. I pushed the cart to room 16. Inside, sitting on the bed, was me. I was facing the window. I was wearing a patient gown. My wristband read, Emily Carter, admitted. Current date. Diagnosis, delusional disorder. Denise checked the chart. This is Melissa Pruitt. I looked at the patient. She turned to face me. It was my face. Evening meds, she said in my voice. Denise handed her a cup. The patient took the pills and swallowed. Open up, Denise said. The patient opened her mouth. Empty. Denise documented compliance and moved to the next room. I stood in the doorway, staring at myself. You'll get used to it, the patient said. Used to what? Being on both sides. I don't finish med rounds anymore, someone else does. I'm not sure who. I'm in room 16 now. I don't remember when I was admitted. They bring me my evening meds at 1800. I always take them. The nurse who delivers them looks exactly like me. The pills don't change who you are. They just help you see which side of the cart you've always been on. The group session group therapy is built on shared experience. Strangers becoming witnesses to each other's pain, learning they're not alone. We sit in a circle. We take turns speaking. We listen. But what happens when the same story is told twice, in the same voice by different people? What if the circle has more people in it than you remember inviting? I counted 12 participants. The roster listed 11. Then the same woman introduced herself twice, and both voices were identical. I facilitated trauma processing groups at Cedarbrook Psychiatric Hospital every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The format was simple. 8 to 12 participants, seated in a circle, each given the opportunity to share their experiences in a safe, structured environment. My role was to guide, to listen, to ensure the space remained supportive. I'd been running these groups for 5 years. I knew the rhythms, the silences, the moments when someone was ready to speak. The group that Thursday was standard size, 11 participants, a mix of inpatients and outpatients, all adults with trauma histories. I knew most of them. A few were new. We began at 1800. I opened with the usual grounding exercise, then invited anyone who felt comfortable to share. A woman named Monica raised her hand. She was in her 40s, soft-spoken, admitted 2 weeks prior for PTSD following a car accident. I'm Monica, she said. I've been here 2 weeks. I'm working on accepting that the accident wasn't my fault. She spoke for 3 minutes, calm, measured, describing the crash, the guilt, the nightmares. The group listened. I thanked her for sharing. Then a woman on the opposite side of the circle raised her hand. "I'm Monica," she said. I looked at her. She was younger, maybe mid-30s, with different hair, different build. But her voice, it was identical. "I've been here 2 weeks," she continued in the exact same tone, the same cadence. "I'm working on accepting that the accident wasn't my fault." She repeated Monica's story word for word, same details, same pauses. I glanced at the first Monica. She was staring at the second woman, confused. "Excuse me," I said, gently interrupting. "I think there's been a misunderstanding Monica just shared. Would you like to tell us your own story?" The second woman looked at me, her expression blank. "I'm Monica," she said again. The first Monica spoke up. "No, I'm Monica." The second woman turned to face her. "I've been here 2 weeks." "So have I." I checked my roster. Only one Monica was listed, Monica Brennan, room 14. I looked at the second woman. "What's your name?" "Monica." "Your full name?" "Monica Brennan." I checked her wristband. It read Lisa Gerhardt. "Lisa," I said carefully. "Your wristband says Lisa." She looked down at it, then back at me. "I'm Monica." The first Monica stood up. "This is insane. I'm Monica. She's copying me." "Please sit down," I said. "Let's take a breath." The second woman, Lisa, according to her wristband, smiled faintly. "I'm Monica. I've been here 2 weeks." I called for a break. I pulled Lisa aside and spoke with her privately in the hallway. "Lisa, do you know where you are?" "Cedarbrook." "Do you know why you're here?" "PTSD, car accident." That's Monica's story. It's my story. I brought her back to the nurse's station and checked her file. Lisa Gerhardt had been admitted 3 days ago for severe depression. No trauma history, no car accident. I returned to the group. Monica was sitting quietly, arms crossed. I resumed the session. "Let's continue," I said. "Who else would like to share?" A man in his 50s raised his hand. "I'm Monica," he said. My stomach dropped. His voice was the same, the exact same voice. "I've been here 2 weeks. I'm working on accepting that the accident wasn't my fault." He repeated the story, word for word. Another participant raised her hand. "I'm Monica." Same voice. Same story. I stood up. "Stop. Everyone stop." They all looked at me. "How many of you are Monica?" I asked. 7 hands went up. I counted the participants. 12 people in the circle. I checked my roster again. 11 names. I looked at each face, trying to identify who didn't belong, who had joined without signing in. They all looked different. Different ages, different genders, different builds. But when I asked them to introduce themselves, they all said the same thing. "I'm Monica." Same voice, same inflection. I ended the session early. I asked everyone to return to their rooms. They filed out calmly, silently. I sat alone in the circle, staring at the empty chairs. On the floor, beneath one of the chairs, I found a name tag. It read, Monica Brennan. But Monica hadn't been wearing a name tag. I checked the sign-in sheet on my clipboard. 12 signatures, I counted them. 13. At the bottom of the page, below the last signature, someone had written in small, neat letters, "You're Monica too." I looked at my reflection in the window. I was sitting in the circle, holding my clipboard, wearing my staff badge. But in the glass, I was wearing a patient wristband. I lifted my arm. No wristband. I looked at the window again. The reflection's wrist showed a white plastic band with my name printed on it. I haven't run a group session since. They assigned someone else to facilitate. But last week I received an email with the session notes from the Thursday group. The facilitator documented that one participant kept interrupting, insisting she was the therapist. The participant's name was listed as Dr. Brennan. My last name. I don't remember being in that group. But when I checked the sign-in sheet, my signature was there, Some circles don't close, they just add chairs until everyone is sitting where they've always belonged. Every hospital has a closed wing, a section too old, too damaged, too expensive to maintain. We lock the doors, we shut off the lights, and we move on. But buildings remember, rooms remember. And sometimes, the files left behind aren't as old as they should be. The power had been cut for 6 years. But when I opened the patient files, they were dated today. I was asked to inspect the north wing of Halford's Psychiatric Institute on a Thursday morning. The wing had been closed since 2016 following what the administration vaguely called an incident, never clarified, never detailed in any report I could access. The space had been sealed off, the utilities disconnected, and the files archived. Now, with talks of renovation or demolition, someone had to assess the structural integrity and document what remained. That someone was me. I was the senior psychiatrist on staff, and apparently that made me qualified to walk through an abandoned wing with a flashlight and a checklist. The entrance was a set of double doors at the end of C corridor, chained shut and marked with a faded sign. Authorized personnel only. Maintenance had left me a key. I unlocked the chain, pushed the doors open, and stepped inside. The air was stale, heavy with dust. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with patient rooms, each door slightly ajar. The lights were dead, no power, just as I'd been told. I clicked on my flashlight and moved forward. The first room was empty. Bare mattress, no linens, a single chair overturned in the corner. I took a photo for the report and continued. The second room was the same, the third, the fourth. At the fifth room, I noticed something odd. Fingerprints. Fresh fingerprints on the inside of the door handle, as if someone had recently gripped it. I stepped inside. The isolation door was designed to lock from the outside, with a small observation window at eye level. I checked the frame. No dust on the handle. No dust on the window latch. I photographed it and moved on. By the time I reached the nursing station at the center of the wing, I'd found fingerprints on 6 doors, all inside the rooms, all recent. The nursing station was a small alcove with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard still pinned with outdated schedules. I opened the filing cabinet. Inside were patient files. I pulled one out. The tab read Patient 14A. I opened it. The intake form was dated today. I checked the timestamp. 0900, 3 hours ago. I flipped through the file. Treatment notes, medication logs, incident reports, all dated within the past week. I pulled another file. Same thing. Current dates, current entries. I pulled a third. This one had my name on it. Dr. Lillian Cross. Staff assignment, North Wing, status, observation. I opened it. Inside was a photo of me taken from a security camera. I was standing in the hallway holding my flashlight, looking at the camera. But I hadn't passed any cameras. The power was off. I checked the timestamp on the photo. It was from 2 minutes ago. I looked up. There was a camera mounted in the corner of the nursing station. The lens was pointed directly at me. The red recording light was on. I backed away. The light stayed on. I turned and walked quickly down the hallway back toward the entrance. My flashlight beam swung across the walls, the floors, the half-open doors. In one of the rooms, I saw movement. I stopped. I shined my light inside. A figure was sitting on the bed facing the wall. "Hello?" I called. No response. I stepped into the room. The figure didn't move. I moved closer. It was a woman wearing a hospital gown, her back to me. "Excuse me, you're not supposed to be here." She turned. It was me. Same face, same hair, same expression. She stood and walked toward me. I stepped back, but she didn't stop. She walked past me, through the door, and down the hallway. I followed her. She moved silently barefoot, her gown trailing behind her. She stopped at the nursing station, picked up a file from the desk, and began reading. I approached slowly. "Who are you?" She didn't look up. "You already know." "No, I don't." She held up the file. It was mine. The one with my photo, my name, my assignment. "You've been assigned here," she said, "just like everyone else." "I'm inspecting the wing. I'm not assigned." She smiled. "That's what they told you." She placed the file back on the desk and walked to one of the patient rooms. She stepped inside and lay down on the bed facing the wall. I looked at the desk. The file was still there, open. I read the top page. Staff Retention Protocol. North Wing Subject. Dr. Lillian Cross assignment date. Today's date. Status. Orientation in progress. Subject unaware of transition. Recommend continued observation until full integration. I flipped the page. Session notes. 0900. Subject enters wing. Believes assignment is temporary. 0915. Subject discovers updated files. Exhibits confusion. 0920. Subject encounters duplicate. Integration phase initiated. I checked my watch. It was 0922. The notes had predicted my movements down to the minute. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. There were 3 of me standing in the hallway, all wearing hospital gowns, all staring. "You're not real," I said. "Neither are you," one of them replied. I ran. I didn't look back. I reached the double doors and pushed through, slamming them shut behind me. I locked the chain and leaned against the wall, gasping. My phone buzzed. A text from administration. "Dr. Cross, please confirm completion of North Wing inspection. Submit report by EOD." I looked at my camera. I had taken 30 photos. I opened the gallery. Every photo showed me, standing in rooms, sitting on beds, staring at the camera. In the last photo, I was lying on a gurney in one of the isolation rooms. My wristband was visible, patient 14L. I haven't submitted the report. I haven't returned to the North Wing, but every morning I receive an updated file in my inbox. North Wing assignment, Dr. Lillian Cross. The status always reads, observation continuing. Some wings don't stay closed. They just wait for the right staff to fill the empty rooms. The sleeper unit sleep studies measure brain activity, map dreams, track the boundary between consciousness and rest. We monitor patients overnight, watching for anomalies, for disorders, for patterns. But what happens when the monitor shows activity from someone who's already gone? What if the waves match your own? The EEG showed brain activity from a patient pronounced dead last week. When I checked my own monitor, the waveforms were identical. I worked as an overnight sleep technician in the psychiatric wing of Green Hill Medical Center, monitoring high-risk patients flagged for sleep disturbances, parasomnias, or medication-induced complications. My job was to observe, record, and intervene if anything went wrong. Most nights were quiet, patients slept, machines hummed, and I documented waveforms until my shift ended at 0600. The unit had 8 beds, each equipped with polysomnography equipment, EEG leads to measure brain activity, sensors for heart rate and breathing, cameras for behavioral monitoring. I sat in the observation room watching 8 screens, each displaying a different patient's data in real time. The problem started on a Wednesday night. Bed 5 had been empty for 3 days. Ever since the previous occupant, a man named Thomas Pruitt, had coded during a sleep study and couldn't be resuscitated. The equipment had been cleaned, the bed stripped, the logs closed. The space was waiting for the next patient. But at 0200, the monitor for bed 5 activated. I looked at the screen. The EEG trace was live, showing rhythmic theta waves, consistent with light sleep. I checked the camera feed. The bed was empty. I walked to bed 5. The room was dark, the mattress bare. No patient, no movement. But the EEG leads were connected, plugged into the headboard jack as if someone had just been hooked up. I disconnected them and returned to the observation room. The monitor went dark. 5 minutes later, it activated again. Same waveforms, same rhythm. I checked the equipment log. No one had accessed bed 5 since Thomas Pruitt's death. I unplugged the entire monitoring station from the wall. The screen stayed on. The waveforms continued. I called my supervisor. She walked me through a reboot protocol. We powered down the system, restarted the server, and reinitialized the monitors. When the system came back online, all 8 screens loaded normally. Bed 5 displayed the same EEG trace. "Must be a cached file," my supervisor said. "Delete it manually." I opened the system admin panel and searched for saved recordings. There were none for bed 5 after Thomas Pruitt's date of death. But the live feed continued. I looked closer at the waveform. It wasn't looping. It was evolving, shifting from theta to delta, the pattern of someone entering deep sleep. I checked the timestamp. The data was generating in real time. "Pull the leads," my supervisor said. "Physically disconnect them." I went back to bed 5. The leads were already disconnected, lying on the mattress. The monitor still showed brain activity. I checked the patient database. Thomas Pruitt's file was marked deceased, 11:04. I opened his final sleep study recording. The last 30 seconds of data showed a flat line. No brain activity, no heartbeat. Standard post-mortem trace. I compared it to the current feed from bed 5. The waveforms were different. The current feed showed a living, sleeping brain. At 0300, I noticed something else. My own monitor, the one tracking my vitals as part of a staff wellness study I'd volunteered for, was displaying an EEG trace identical to bed 5. I checked the connections. My leads were properly attached, transmitting from my own scalp, but the waveform on my screen matched the phantom signal from bed 5 exactly. Same frequency, same amplitude, same phase. I disconnected my leads. The trace on my monitor continued, and so did the trace on bed 5's monitor. I stared at both screens. 2 identical waveforms running in perfect synchrony as if they were coming from the same brain. I ran a diagnostic. The system flagged an anomaly. Dual signal detected. Source, bed 5 tech station 1. I wasn't in bed 5, I was in the observation room. I checked the camera feed for bed 5 again. This time, someone was in the bed. I leaned closer to the monitor. It was me. I was lying on my back, eyes closed, EEG leads attached, breathing slowly. I looked down at myself. I was sitting in the observation room. I was awake. I checked the timestamp on the bed 5 camera. It was live. I stood up and walked to bed 5. The room was empty. I returned to the observation room. The camera still showed me lying in the bed. I waved my hand in front of the bed 5 camera. The figure in the bed didn't move. I checked the EEG trace. The waveforms had shifted, now showing REM sleep, dreaming. I wasn't asleep. I checked my own monitor. The trace showed the same thing, REM sleep. I touched my face. I was awake. I was standing. I was moving. But the data said I was dreaming. At 0400, the figure in bed 5 opened its eyes. It sat up, slowly, and looked directly at the camera, at me. Then it stood and walked to the door. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I turned. I was standing in the doorway of the observation room wearing a hospital gown, EEG leads trailing from my scalp. "You're still dreaming," I said to myself. "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are. You've been dreaming since 0200, since you saw the trace." I stepped back. "Well, that's not possible." The other me smiled. "Check the log." I looked at the event log on the monitor. 0158. Tech 1 enters REM sleep. 0202, anomalous signal detected. Tech 1 unresponsive. 0317, Tech 1 exhibits parasomnia. Sleep monitoring behavior observed. I wasn't awake. I was dreaming that I was working. You coded, the other me said, just like Thomas. They're trying to wake you up, but you keep dreaming that you're here, that you're monitoring yourself. I looked at the screens. All 8 beds now showed my face. All 8 EEG traces matched. I'm not dead, I said. Not yet. The monitors flatlined, all at once. I woke up in bed 5, gasping, surrounded by crash cart equipment and emergency staff. We got her back, someone said. They removed the EEG leads. They wheeled me out. I asked what happened. Cardiac event during your sleep study, the doctor said. You've been out for 3 minutes. I was awake. I was working. No, you were dreaming. I don't work overnight anymore. I don't do sleep studies, but every night at 0200 I wake up in the observation room. The monitors are on. Bed 5 is occupied, and the waveform always matches mine. Some sleep studies never finish. They just cycle between the bed and the screen until the trace runs flat. Ward intercom. The intercom connects us, allows us to coordinate, to respond, to communicate across the unit. We use it for codes, for shift changes, for routine announcements. But what happens when it speaks without being activated? What if it repeats the day's events backwards, and cutting the power doesn't stop the voice? The intercom was repeating the shift report backwards. When I cut the power, a voice said, "Don't leave us in silence." I started working as a night shift nurse at Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital in March. The building was old, built in the 1970s, and still used an antiquated intercom system, wall-mounted speakers in every room, activated by a central control panel at the nurse's station. We used it sparingly. Shift changes, emergency codes, reminders for group therapy. Most of the time it sat silent, until it didn't. The first time I heard it, I was charting at the nurse's station around 0200. The intercom crackled to life, static, then a voice. Medications distributed, all patients accounted for, shift complete. It was my voice, playing backwards. I looked up at the speaker mounted above the desk. The red active light wasn't on. No one had pressed the call button. I checked the control panel. All channels were off. The voice continued, distorted and reversed, reciting the evening's shift report in reverse chronological order. Quiet room check, patient stable, vitals recorded. I pressed the master shut-off. The speaker went silent. I logged it as an equipment malfunction and radioed maintenance. They said they'd check it in the morning. At 0300, it happened again. This time, the intercom played the entire evening medication round, backwards. I heard my own voice calling out patient names in reverse, heard the responses, heard the cart rolling down the hallway and rewind. I shut it off again. At 0400, it activated on its own. This time, it wasn't my voice. It was whispers. Multiple voices overlapping, speaking in reverse. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, distressed. I walked to the intercom speaker and listened closely. One phrase repeated clearer than the rest. Eknelis nisu evailta nodi. I reversed it mentally. Don't leave us in silence. I stepped back. The whispers stopped. The speaker went silent. I checked the patient rooms. Everyone was asleep. I returned to the station. The intercom activated again. This time it played a sound I recognized. The emergency code alarm, the one we used for violent incidents. But it was playing backwards, the tone distorted and wrong. Then my voice again, calm, procedural, giving a status update. Code gray resolved, patient restrained, all staff accounted for. But we hadn't had a code gray that night. I checked the log. The last code gray was 3 weeks ago. I shut off the intercom. I unplugged the control panel from the wall. The speaker stayed on. The voice continued. I called maintenance again. The intercom won't turn off. Did you use the master shutoff? Yes, I also unplugged it. That should kill it. It's still running. Silence on the line. Then, I'll come up. 15 minutes later, the maintenance tech arrived. He inspected the control panel, tested the wiring, and checked the speaker. Everything's disconnected, he said. It shouldn't be transmitting. But it is. He listened. The intercom was silent now. I don't hear anything. I pointed at the speaker. It was playing shift reports backwards. He looked at me like I'd said something absurd. Backwards? Yes. He tested the speaker again. Silence. Probably just interference. Old system picks up radio signals sometimes. He left. At 0500, the intercom activated again. This time it wasn't reversed. It was live. I heard footsteps in the hallway, broadcast through the intercom as if someone were walking past an open mic. I looked at the hallway. It was empty. I heard a door open. Close. I checked the patient rooms. All doors were shut. The intercom broadcast the sound of a med cart rolling, papers shuffling. My own voice, distant, speaking to a patient. Time for your evening meds. But I was sitting at the nurse's station. I wasn't in a patient room. I stood up and walked down the hallway. The sounds from the intercom matched my movements. Footsteps, door hinges, the rustle of my scrubs. I stopped walking. The sounds continued. I heard myself enter a room, heard myself speak. Open wide, good. All done. I ran to the room the voice seemed to be coming from. I opened the door. The patient was asleep, undisturbed. But the intercom was still broadcasting. Next patient, room 12. I went to room 12. Same thing. Patient asleep. The intercom continued narrating a medication round I wasn't conducting. I returned to the nurse's station. I grabbed a screwdriver from the supply closet and pried open the intercom control panel. I pulled every wire. The speaker stayed on. I smashed the control box with the screwdriver. The voice didn't stop. I looked up at the ceiling-mounted speaker. The active light was still off, but the broadcast continued. All patients accounted for. Shift complete. Logging off. Then silence. I stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by sparking wires and broken plastic. The intercom crackled once more. A single voice. Calm. Clear. Don't leave us in silence. I backed away. The next night, I reported the incident to my supervisor. She reviewed the security footage. There's nothing here, she said, showing me the playback. The footage showed me sitting at the nurse's station, charting for the entire shift. No walking, no opening doors, no medication round. I heard it, I said. Heard what? The intercom. It was broadcasting my movements. She replayed the audio feed from the security system. Silence. No intercom activations, no voices. You're working too many nights, she said. I requested a transfer to day shift. It was denied. Every night now, it's 0200, the intercom activates. It plays the shift backwards. And at the end, the same voice. Don't leave us in silence. I don't shut it off anymore. I'm afraid of what will happen if I do. Some systems don't broadcast from the present. They echo what we've already done, reminding us we've been heard all along. Discharge summary. Discharge marks the end. Treatment complete. Patient stabilized. Ready to return to the world. We write the final summary. We sign the forms. We close the file. But what happens when your own name appears in the discharge log? What if the signatures are all in your handwriting and the final note says you're stable enough for observation? I was preparing the year-end discharge summary when I found my own name listed under inpatient care. Every signature on the form was written in my handwriting. The last entry read, "Doctor deemed stable for continued observation." I'd been the medical director at Thornhill Psychiatric Institute for 12 years, and every December I compiled the year-end discharge summary. A comprehensive report documenting every patient admitted, treated, and released over the previous 12 months. It was tedious, methodical work, but necessary for state compliance and institutional review. I began the report on a Monday morning, pulling files from the archive and cross-referencing them against the electronic discharge log. The process was straightforward. Verify each patient's admission date, treatment course, and discharge status, then compile the data into a master summary. By midday, I'd reviewed 40 files. Everything was in order. Then I opened the file for patient 47D. The intake form listed no name, just the designation 47D and an admission date from 6 months prior. I checked the discharge log. The patient had been released in November, marked stable, outpatient follow-up recommended. I pulled the full treatment record. The attending physician was listed as Dr. Raymond Cross. My name. I didn't remember treating a patient 47D. I flipped through the session notes. Each one was written in my handwriting, detailing weekly therapy sessions, medication adjustments, and progress evaluations. The presenting complaint. Patient believes he is employed at this facility. Exhibits delusional occupational identity. Performs administrative tasks without awareness of patient status. I stopped reading. This was wrong. I checked the signature on the intake form. My signature. I checked the medication orders. My signature. I checked the discharge summary. My signature. Every document in the file was signed by me. But I had never treated this patient. I went to the admissions office and requested the original intake paperwork for patient 47D. The clerk pulled the file and handed it to me. The photo clipped to the intake form was of me. "This is a mistake," I said. "It's the file you requested." "This is my photo." She checked the database. Patient 47D, admitted June 14th. Attending physician Dr. Raymond Cross, discharged November 20th. "I'm Dr. Cross, I didn't treat myself." She looked at me, concerned. "Are you feeling all right?" I left the office. I returned to my desk and opened the electronic medical record system. I searched for patient 47D. The file opened. Inside were detailed session notes, spanning 6 months, all written by me. I read through them. The narrative was consistent. A psychiatric professional admitted for acute delusional disorder, convinced he was the medical director, performing administrative duties as part of therapeutic role play. The treatment plan. Allow patient to continue occupational role play until insight emerges. Monitor for signs of reality testing. The final note, dated November 20th. Patient demonstrates improved insight, acknowledges previous delusions. Discharge approved, outpatient follow-up recommended. I didn't write these notes. I opened the next file in the stack, patient 48A. Same thing, my handwriting, my signature, my photo. I opened another, same. I pulled 20 more files. All of them listed me as the patient. All of them documented the same delusional belief that I was the medical director. All of them were signed by me. I stood up, walked to my office door, and looked at the nameplate. Dr. Raymond Cross, medical director. I checked my ID badge. Same name, same title. I walked to the administrative wing and demanded to see the personnel files. The HR director pulled my file and showed it to me. Inside was a patient intake form dated 12 years ago. Patient name, Raymond Cross. Diagnosis, delusional disorder, grandiose type. Treatment plan, Long-term inpatient care with occupational therapy. Patient to assume administrative role as part of therapeutic intervention. I looked at the director. This is insane. Dr. Cross, please sit down. I'm the medical director. I've been here for 12 years. Yes, we know that's part of your treatment. Treatment for what? She opened another folder. Inside were incident reports spanning 12 years, documenting episodes where I'd broken character, refused to acknowledge patient status, or became agitated when confronted. You've been doing very well, she said. The role-play therapy has been incredibly effective, but we need you to understand you're not staff, you're a patient. I ran. I went to my office, locked the door, and called my wife. No answer. I called again. A voicemail. This number is no longer in service. I checked my wallet, my driver's license, my credit cards, all there. But my emergency contact card listed Thornhill Psychiatric Institute as my home address. I checked my phone. The contact list was empty except for one entry, Thornhill Main Desk. I opened my email. The inbox was filled with internal memos, meeting schedules, discharge summaries, all addressed to me as medical director. But in the sent folder, I found something else. Emails to my supervisor requesting clarification about my role, asking when my assignment would end, questioning whether I was still a patient. The responses were always the same. Dr. Cross, you are performing your duties excellently. Continue as assigned. I checked the date of the first email, 12 years ago. The same day I started as medical director. I don't know what's real anymore. I still come to the office every day. I still write discharge summaries, but now, when I sign them, I check the patient name first. It's always mine. Some discharges are never finalized. They just cycle us back into the roles we've been assigned, one signature at a time.